Hey, hi, this is Sandeep Gupta, founder of Top 1% GMAT, an institute devoted exclusively to the 99th percentile scores on the GMAT. What I mean by 99th percentile is a score between 760 and 800 on the GMAT. Before we start discussing the questions, you must make sure you've solved each of the 10 questions thoroughly by focusing on accuracy and not on speed, and you have marked each of your answers as your absolutely fully final answer. Okay, let's continue. Now, in this question, the very first thought that may come to your mind is that there is not enough information to solve this problem, not enough data. That is what you might think. But when you look at the options, there is no option called none of these or cannot be determined, which means this question must be solvable very quickly by some innovative approach. So let's start with whatever is given to you. You're given this number as 60, but this is a sum of many things, so really this doesn't help much. So, and you're given this number is 12. Let's see. 12, this is a perpendicular, this is also a perpendicular. Now 12 is a very special number when it comes to right angled triangles. Why is 12 such a special number? Because we know that 3, 4 and 5 is the first right angled triangle, first Pythagorean triplet. And coincidentally, you will notice that 12 is a multiple of 3 and a multiple of 4 both. So I can create 12 from here and I can create 12 from here. How do we create 12 from this? Let's see. I have to multiply by 4 here and I have to multiply by 3 here. So this will become 12, 16, 20 and this will become 9, 12, 15. 3, 4 and 5 has been multiplied by 4 and 3, 4 and 5 has been multiplied by 3 here. So these become the two possible triangles. Again, remember this is not sure, but this is just some innovation we are trying to do so that we can create some possibilities. Now because 12 is a common number in both of these triplets and because 12 is a common side in both of these triangles, maybe these could be the two triangles. We'll try to see. We are also given that PQ is greater than QR. So that means this triangle is bigger than this triangle. So let's try to put the numbers 12, 16, 20. This is 12, this will be 16. The perpendicular sides are smaller. The largest side is the hypotenuse. This is 20. And in the same way, this will become 9 and this will become 15. Right now, we are not sure that these are the right combinations, but let's double check. So the perimeter is given as 60. Let's see, 16 plus 9, 25, plus 15, 40, plus 20, 60. So this is an absolute double check. You are also given all the sides are integers. This is also a double check. So the combinations that we have thought of are absolutely correct. Now, what will be the area of two right angle triangles? Obviously, area is half base into height. So half of 12 into 16. And in this is the area of this triangle, and half of base into height 12 into 9. This is the area of this triangle. So half will cancel, 12 will cancel, and the answer will come out 16 divided by 9. That is answer D here. So whenever you look at an algebra problem on the GMAT that looks a little challenging or daunting, the best way is to try to substitute a number and then solve the problem. But before solving this problem, you have to know one property, that square roots on the GMAT are never negative. This is a rule on the GMAT. Outside of the GMAT, you may say, oh, square roots are negative also. We know that root 25 is 5 or minus 5. But please remember, on the GMAT, minus 5 is never the answer. 5 is the only answer for square root of 25, and no square roots are ever negative. X is negative. Let's substitute an easy negative number, x equal to minus 1. So what will this become? Fourth root of minus 1 minus 3 to the power 4 plus minus of minus 1 into mod of minus 1. Now minus 1 minus 3 is minus 4. Minus 4 to the power 4 is 4 to the power 4 itself. And 4 to the power 4, if you don't directly know, you say 4 square is 16, and 16 into 16 will then become 256. So fourth root of 256 plus this will be minus into minus is plus, and mod is always positive. So this is root of 1. Fourth root of 256 on the GMAT, remember, will not be minus 4. It will only be plus 4. That's it. This is all that you have to remember. And plus root of 1 will only be equal to 1 and not minus 1. So 4 plus 1, 5 is what I should get. Now the same value when I substitute here, I should again get 5. So if I substitute x equal to minus 1, I definitely don't get 5. If I substitute x equal to minus 1, I get 5. If I substitute x equal to minus 1, I don't get 5. There is no substitution here and the value is not 5. And in this case, if I substitute x equal to minus 1, the value is not 5. Okay, if you're really surprised by the answer, let's understand the answer by algebra. Just remember, the root of x square on the GMAT is x or minus x, whichever is positive. So in this case, when x is negative, then x cannot be my answer because x is negative. So my answer in this case will be minus x. Just assume for a second x minus 3 equal to y. So in this case, you are calculating fourth root of y to the power 4, which will be equal to y or minus y, whichever is positive. That means in place of y, we can once again substitute it will be equal to either x minus 3 or minus of x minus 3, whichever is positive, or it will be equal to x minus 3 or minus of x minus 3 will be minus x plus 3 or equal to 3 minus x, whichever is positive, right? Now when x is negative, x minus 3 will be negative and 3 minus x will be positive. So out of the two, this will be your answer, not this one. So for the first one, you write 3 minus x, not x minus 3. Now if x is negative, negative of x will become positive and mod is anyway positive. So this expression will become root of x square. Now root of x square is equal to x or minus x, whichever is positive. Now because x is negative, minus x will be positive. So the answer for this part will be minus x. So now we have 3 minus x and minus x, 3 minus 2x as the final answer. Now let's see how to do this in 10 seconds flat. You should just know that this value will be positive and this value will be positive. So positive and positive, overall answer should be positive. So if x is negative, 2x minus 3 will always be negative. If x is negative, 3 minus 2x will always be positive. If x is negative, x square minus 3 can be negative. Just substitute x equal to minus 1. This will become 1 minus 3, which will be a negative number. This is already a negative number, so there is no way this can be the answer. And if x is negative, substitute x equal to minus 2, let's say. Even this will become negative. Minus 4 plus 3 is minus 1. So the answer must always be positive irrespective of any negative value of x. And the only answer that will always be positive is this answer. This will take you just 10 seconds to solve this question. And you can completely bypass the earlier two methods that we just discussed. All right. So let's assume the first statement 7x is even. Normally, if you're not paying attention, you will automatically say, obviously, if 7x is even, x must be even. You have made some mistake here, dear friend, and that is if 7x equal to 2, then x would have been 2 by 7, and this is not an even number because even numbers are first integers. A fraction cannot be called an even number. But if 7x equal to 14, then x is equal to 2 and it is an even number. Now you can see there is a contradiction. I would have got a no answer here. I would have got a yes answer here. Definitely the first statement is not sufficient. In the same way, let's say if we have 5x is equal to 2, x will be 2 by 5. If I have 5x equal to 10, x will be equal to 2. In this case, once again, I'll get a no answer. I'll get a yes answer here. It will not be sufficient again. I know this may be very surprising for you because you may have instinctively taken x as an integer without even thinking about it. But then that is the problem. You should not assume anything that is not given to you. So now what should be my next step if the first statement is not sufficient and the second statement is also not sufficient? Obviously, I should combine. So which mathematical operation will be the best to apply here? If I add, I'll increase the size. 7x plus 5x is 12x. If I multiply, it will become x square and so on. It is not going to be useful. If I divide, x will vanish. So the best mathematical operation to apply is subtraction so that we reduce the size. Now what do I do so that I can get to x? So it means I must shorten as much as possible. So let's say 7x minus 5x is 2x. 2x is even. 5x minus 2x is 3x. So 3x is even. And 3x minus 2x is x, so x is even. Because even minus even is always even. It doesn't matter whether you do 4 minus 2 or 2 minus 4. 2 is also an even number, minus 2 is also an even number. Any even number minus any other even number is always even. So by combining, we surely get x is an even number, and the answer I'll mark is the answer C. Now let's see this question. To solve this question, you should know a very basic property of triangles. Sum of any two sides of a triangle is bigger than the third side. And the difference of any two sides of a triangle is smaller than the third side. Now here you are given a minus b is 15. So 15 is less than c. That means c is greater than 15. Now, if you apply it here, a plus b will be greater than c, so a plus b will automatically become more than 15. Now, if a plus b is greater than 15 and c is also greater than 15, then a plus b plus c should be greater than 30. 15 plus 15 is 30. So is the perimeter greater than 30? Obviously, yes, this statement will be sufficient to answer the question. Okay, let's see the second statement. I know this can sound a little baffling to you that only the area is given. How can we determine whether the perimeter is greater than 30 or not? But obviously, if the GMAT has given this, there is something that is being tested here. So now let's see if the perimeter of a triangle is 30. What is the largest area I can create? You should know this property. If you don't, it's okay right now, but later it will be taught to you. The most symmetrical figure always happens to have the most area. The largest area is for highest symmetry. So now the perimeter is 30. What is the most symmetrical triangle we can produce? And that we all know is equilateral triangle. That means all the sides are equal. So right now the sides may become 10, 10 and 10. That is equilateral triangle. This will surely have the largest possible area with a perimeter of 30. We cannot cross more than that area no matter what. So what is the area of an equilateral triangle? It is root 3 by 4 a square. Even if you have forgotten, it is okay. Later you will learn it in our classes in extreme detail. So this will be root 3 by 4 into 10 into 10. 100 divided by 4 is 25. 25 into root 3. Even if you don't know the exact value of root 3, you know that root 3 is less than 2. So this value is less than 50. If you want to calculate, root 3 is 1.732. This will come to around 43. So now what do we have here? With perimeter equal to 30, maximum area is 43. So if I want area to be 50, then definitely it cannot happen with a perimeter of 30. That means I will have to increase the perimeter. So for an area of 50, perimeter will have to become greater than 30. So with a perimeter of 30, the maximum area we can create is 43. But if the area of the triangle is 50, then there is a sure short conclusion that the perimeter will have to be greater than 30. So even this statement is sufficient. This statement is anyway sufficient. So the answer finally is D. Now, if you think that you're really weak at math, this might sound a little overwhelming to you. So let me show you some of the people that came to us in the past who, by their own admission, were pretty weak at mathematics and still they went on to score spectacularly well. I'm sharing a couple of stories with you. Let's see. The first story I want to share is that of Annie, who had just completed her first year BCom and moved into the second year. She was 19 when she came to us, and admittedly, she was pretty weak at quantitative skills. And to add to that, she scored just 1 out of 30 in her initial student assessment test. But in just a few months of training with us, she got a 760 score on the GMAT. She was the youngest Indian at that time to score a 99th percentile on the GMAT, and that is why the Times of India also covered her story as an exclusive feature. So why not hear from Annie herself as to what her experience was like?
Hi there, I'm Annie. I'm 19 years old and I scored a 760 on my GMAT. So the breakup was 44 in verbal and 50 in quant. I consulted with many of my seniors and I attended demo classes at 4 to 5 other GMAT prepping centers, and I finally zeroed in on Sandeep Gupta. I was a little apprehensive about the whole process because I come from a non-math, non-engineering background. And to add to that, I scored a 1 out of 30 on my student assessment test at the beginning. The techniques that they taught in class, they're all priceless. The concepts that they provide you with, trust me, it's a little Bible for a GMAT taker. They will help to take you a long way. Concepts like octave and prime. It's almost like magic, the way they cut down such an ambiguous seeming problem. The options will just go from 5 to 2 in a matter of seconds using the techniques that Sandeep provide you with. Even if you do 1/3 of the material that they've given you, you will do really, really well in your exam. Working on the material that they gave us for the self-prep time and doing our homework, which is really, really important, I got the score and I'm really thankful to 99th percentile club. Thank you.
I hope you noticed what Annie said in her testimonial. Even if you exhaust 1/3 of the material, you will do really, really well on this exam. So let me just assure you about the material we provide. It is absolutely exhaustive. Every single thing that you need to study, absolutely everything, right from start to finish, will be provided from our side. You don't have to refer to even one extra word from anywhere else. I hope that is clear. Let's move on. Let's see one more story, that of Kavya. Now, Kavya was very apprehensive about the math part because she came from fine arts and graphic design background and really was very apprehensive about the quant section. Eventually, she went to Harvard University. She also got into Wharton and Duke with very significant scholarships. So let's hear from her what her experience was like.
Hi, I'm Kavya, and I'm here to talk about the amazing impression Sandeep made on me when he helped me with my MBA applications. And I was accepted into several schools, including Wharton and Duke, with significant financial aid. So thank you very much, Sandeep. The really awesome thing about working with Sandeep was that I am an arts undergrad, so I studied fine art and graphic design, and I was extremely nervous about the math section of the GMAT, and he really talked me through and helped me work with it, and just really made me comfortable with the fact that I could, score well on the math portion. And I think that's what really helped me with the GMAT test.
So let's move our attention to the verbal section of the GMAT. In critical reasoning, there is a technique that I follow. That technique is called ACT, Assumption Centrality Technique, which basically implies that every single critical reasoning question is an assumption question in disguise. It does sound a bit strange, but we will learn that in extreme detail in our sessions, that every single question in critical reasoning is an assumption question in disguise. Okay, so the very first thing in critical reasoning is always to identify the conclusion of the argument, and it is very clearly given. You are supposed to evaluate the conclusion drawn in this argument. So what is the conclusion? Let's see. This is obviously here. It is derived from all the facts given in the beginning. This clearly goes to show that Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged has influenced many intellectuals who are readers of newspaper X. Now let's see right from the beginning. 10,000 is a number. It is given, which is the most verse awayed, means it is a fact. And asked is a fact. To name that one specific that had influenced them the most in their lives. All of the 10,000 readers, again, this is a number. Responded, this is a fact. The maximum number, this is again a number. And chose the Bible is a fact. The second highest again is a number. And chose Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged. This is a fact. Now see one thing, it's important here. All the facts are given in numbers here. So based on the facts given in numbers, what kind of conclusion can we derive? Obviously, let's see, the word many becomes the center point of this question. Now the best way to attack critical reasoning is always to attack the author's assumption. So you have to really ask, what is the assumption made by the author? The author assumes that second highest is automatically equal to many, but second highest could just be equal to 1 or 2 out of 10,000. So this is not necessary that second highest is equal to many. That is the assumption we are breaking. Now let's take a few scenarios. Suppose the Bible was chosen by 9,999 people and Atlas Shrugged was chosen by one person only. In this case also, it is the second highest, but can one be considered many people? One is definitely not many. So this is definitely suddenly questioning the author. But if the Bible was chosen by 5,001 people and Atlas Shrugged was chosen by, let's say, 4,999 people. Now, this number is definitely a large number out of 10,000. So this can surely be called many. So in order to decide whether Atlas Shrugged was chosen by many people or few people, we will have to know what is the number of people that actually chose Atlas Shrugged. So imagine this, how many of the 10,000 people chose Atlas Shrugged? If I say one person chose, or two or three or four, or 4,000 or 4,999, we will be then able to say whether it was chosen by many people or few people. So by this logic, this seems to be the absolutely correct answer. Now let's see all the other answers. So in this case, it is written how many of the 10,000 people had actually read the book. In today's day and age, it is not at all necessary to read the book per se, because you can have an audio book, for example. So there is no need for people to read the book. And apart from that, it will still not tell me whether Atlas Shrugged impacted many people or few people. So it is absolutely irrelevant. Now option B, how many people spoke the truth? Now this is a tempting answer, and this is what the GMAT does in questions that are more complicated. They will put the more attractive wrong answer just ahead of the right answer. So your mind is almost made up to choose this one, but this is absolutely irrelevant. Let's see how. First of all, when people say something in the survey, it is taken at the face value. And even after knowing this number, we cannot say whether Atlas Shrugged was actually chosen by many people or not chosen by many people. What people do in their lives is really not our concern. What their actual truth is not our concern. The survey will be based on what people say. The result of the survey will also be based on only what people say. So it has absolutely no bearing on the conclusion. But it is a deceptive wrong answer for sure. Now, option D. How many books had each person surveyed read? It is very clearly written that each of the persons was asked to name only one book. So if I'm asked what is the one book that has influenced you the most, I'll give just one answer. So it doesn't matter how many books I've read, whether I've read one book or 1,000 books or 10,000 books in my life does not make any difference to the survey. So this is irrelevant altogether. And even then, even if I know this, that doesn't answer whether Atlas Shrugged impacted many people or not. Now, option E, how many book titles were nominated by these 10,000 people? The answer to option E will just not affect how many people chose Atlas Shrugged. Absolutely no conclusion can be drawn based on this. So this is really not the right answer, absolutely irrelevant. So we will go with option C here. Now in this question, let's understand what is given to us. Any top-notch graduate has an IQ of more than 120. Most people who have an IQ of more than 120 and who apply, and all people who have an IQ of more than 150 and who apply get through one or more Ivy League universities, at least one Ivy League university. Now, in this case, what is given in option A is IQ of 150, whereas what is the guarantee? IQ over 150. So this is a questionable thing and just enough for us to eliminate this answer. If there is a high school graduate, IQ is less than 100, he or she could not have been a student at top notch. See how smartly they changed the wording. So let's see exactly how to approach this. Suppose earlier there was a student at top notch whose IQ was less than 100. And after studying for some time at top notch, this student left the school, went somewhere else, and graduated from some other place. And his or her IQ is still less than 100. And this person could still have been an earlier student of top notch. So now let's say if a person is a high school graduate, yes, graduate, IQ is still less than 100, but earlier he or she could have been a student of top notch. Now, if this word had been graduate, this would have been the correct answer. Now, let's see at least one graduate from top notch high school who has applied to any Ivy League university. Now, there is a catch here. I cannot say any because you're given they're accepted to at least one. Now, at least one could just mean one or two or three, but does not mean any. Any means absolutely any number and anywhere that person applies to. The only condition is at least one, not the right answer. They get through one or more, but one or more could be one or two also. So, not every university that they apply to, they get through. Clearly not correct. So, in option D, just try to see it is possible means maybe and may not be. Now let's see exactly what is happening. Most people who are above 120 and who apply get through. So that means a lot of people above 120 who are not above 150 can also make it. And obviously some of them or many of them can be top-notch school graduates. So it's a very strong possibility that somebody studying in an Ivy League university who has an IQ of more than 120, in this case 130, was from top-notch. It's not a guarantee. Maybe from top-notch, may not be from top-notch. This is perfect. There is nothing I can challenge in this answer. Let's see option E. If a high school graduate has an IQ of 150, again, it should be over 150, not of 150. So this is a definite question mark and is not attending. See how deceptive they make the question. You are given they are accepted. Now it is attending. You may be accepted to 5 universities, but you cannot attend all of them. So if you are not attending a university, that does not mean you did not apply. You may apply to 5 schools or 5 universities, you may get through all of them, but you cannot be attending all of them. So if you are not attending, it doesn't mean you did not apply to that university. So clearly wrong. Now, my experience as a GMAT coach over so many years has been that even those students who go on to score a 99th percentile score on the GMAT eventually find critical reasoning really challenging in the beginning. So let's meet one such student who scored a 760 on the GMAT and 46 on verbal. Yes, 46 on verbal. Let's see. Abhishek, When he started his training, his accuracy in CR was 0% and his accuracy was 20% in SC and 10% in RC. And despite that, in a few months, he scored 46 on verbal. 46 on verbal is one of the rarest of rare scores, at least for an Indian student, because throughout the entire section, you can't make more than one mistake if you want a score of 46 on verbal. So let's hear from Abhishek, his own experience with critical reasoning.
I'm Abhishek. I recently took my GMAT and I got a score of 760. Not even in my wildest of dreams had I thought I'd get a score of 46 on verbal. I mean, I used to struggle a lot at CR. I used to get so distraught while he used to do CR. The tips that he gave me that day, regarding CR, I consider that to be the most important factor why I got a 760 score. The tips that he gave me, especially in CR, was amazing, mind-blowing. For me, it was a total perspective shift, and from 0%, I remember in first handout, I went to 77% accuracy. That was CR3. In CR3, I had a 77% accuracy.
Okay, so let's now see sentence correction. This is one area where almost every non-native speaker struggles a lot. Especially if I talk about Indian students, I barely meet someone who says SC is absolutely in control and it was never a problem. So this is one thing that you'll have to really master. But let's see, what is the approach? What do I do? So there is only one rule according to me in SC: never ever use intuitive reasoning, that this sounds right, this smells right, this seems right, it sounds correct to my ear. That is not the point. You convert sentence correction into a math problem. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, that means you'll answer based on logic and rules, not based on how it sounds to you or intuition. And trust me, dear friend, you are not alone. There are many people who struggle with sentence correction. I'm introducing you to one such student, Tanmay, who initially, when he came to me, struggled so much with sentence correction that he could never ever get a decent score on the GMAT, forget a 760. In fact, in many of his previous attempts, his highest score in verbal had been just 21, and eventually, with my guidance, he scored 42 on verbal and 760 as a result. And then he has worked with some of the dream companies after his MBA from Tepper. So let's hear from him how he really benefited from my technique, Prime, that converts sentence correction to almost like a math problem. Let's hear from him.
Hi, I am Tanmay, and I'm here to speak about Sandeep Gupta, who changed my life completely. My GMAT score is 760, with a breakup of 15 maths and 42 in English. The first day I met him, I was taken aback by his statement saying that anything below 760 is not acceptable. A little about myself. English is not where my strength is, or my strength lies. I've been good in maths. So the way he understood that part and the way he taught me English grammar, or the GMAT English grammar, was very much set of rules, and he made it like maths. So it was very easy for me to grasp. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned from him, and which I transformed into results. I really thank him, and I believe he changes life of many others.
So now let's see a glimpse of how this prime method works. Prime stands for preferences, rules, idioms, meaning, and elimination. So this is your formula for solving sentence correction problems like mathematics. And I can guarantee near 100% accuracy, at least 95% for sure. So if you solve 20 questions with this method, 19 out of 20 you will definitely get correct once you master this technique completely. It takes a really long time for me to teach this and a long time for you to master this, but the returns are absolutely splendid, as you just saw in the case of Tanmay. Now this entire prime method takes me at least 10 hours to teach. Right now I'm showcasing to you just a glimpse of it. Now what are preferences? Preferences are words or expressions that are preferred on the GMAT. For example, there's this rule: verbs are preferred to adjectives and adjectives are preferred to nouns. This is called the VAN rule on the GMAT. That means anything, if you can write the verb form versus the adjective form versus the noun form, the GMAT would love the verb form. This is just one of the hundreds of preferences. Let's say if I say he can do something, he is able to do something, and he has the ability to do something. All three are grammatically correct, but on the GMAT, only this will be considered correct because this uses the verb form. Able is the adjective form, ability is the noun form. So on the GMAT, these two will not be preferred. This is the meaning of preferences. There are hundreds of words and expressions. We will learn them in extreme detail. Now, what are rules? Obviously, grammar is all about rules, but the GMAT usually uses rules that are not studied by non-native people, especially by Indian students. So rules like modifier, rules like parallelism, rules like pronoun reference, rules like comparison, quite a few rules that we generally do not know. So there are once again hundreds of these. Now there's one area that almost everyone who is a non-native speaker of English struggles with a lot, and that is idioms. So what are idioms after all? Idioms are a particular way of writing and expressing that is prevalent in the native country where English language is spoken. Now, because the GMAT is an American test, what we follow on the GMAT will be American idioms. And they're very different from Indian idioms. In India, a lot of things that we speak are not correct. For example, in India, people say neck to neck competition. You'll be surprised that there is no expression called neck to neck. It is neck and neck. In India, people use the expression it was pin drop silence. But remember, there is no expression called pin drop silence. The expression is it was so quiet that I could hear a pin drop. In India, people say cope up with something. There is no expression called cope up with, it is just cope with. So we do distort a lot of idioms from the American English, and that is why it takes a long time for us to master this. One more example is how much ever. There is no expression like how much ever. The correct expression is however much. But in India, somehow people have distorted this and they use how much ever I hate my boss, I still have to talk to him 5 days a week. How much ever I hate my job, I still have to continue because of the money. So we say how much ever, but the correct expression is however much. So there are many idioms that Indians use wrongly. So our ears are not tuned to listening to the right ones, and that is why this thing takes time to master. Now, the fourth thing, which is the most important out of all these five, meaning clarity. To make a question more difficult, the GMAT may make its grammar correct, its preferences correct, its idioms correct, but may distort the meaning because intuitively we are not wired to look for the meaning part of the sentence. Now, these days there is a trend. If a question in SC is above 700 level, it is bound to test meaning clarity. So what do we understand by meaning clarity? It is simple. The sentence should make sense in the real world. It should be logically correct, it should be commonsensically correct, and it should just make sense. And obviously we follow the process called elimination, not selection. So do not ever select that, okay, I like B as the answer, so B is the right answer, I will not check the other ones. This is a fatal approach. So you have to use elimination. The major method is PRIM here, and it leads to a beautiful acronym called PRIM, because the word PRIM is used with prim and proper English, and that is why PRIM is probably a very apt acronym for the entire sentence correction bit. So now let's see all this in application. Now let's see how all of this has to be applied. We have the word however, despite, although, even though. All these are contradiction words, but there is no contradiction word in option E. So this is something that you should notice in the beginning. So the beginning of underline does not give me much clue except that there is no contradiction word here. Now the end of the underline is the next place we should really look for. So we see the word that here, but we don't see the word that here. We don't see the word that here. We don't see the word that here, and we see the word that here. Apart from that, in the middle, if you want to see, there is the word agree, then agreement, then agree, then agree, and then agreement. So this is a verb form, this is a noun form. Now let's see whether this that is required or not. So we read the sentence further and we find and that. So if we write and that later, it's logical to say we should write the word that first, then only parallelism works. This is a rule on the GMAT called that and that parallelism. It is a very crucial rule on the GMAT and is applied extensively. So if we are using and that, then we should be using one that before. So that eliminates options B, C, and D immediately, because options B, C, and D violate a very basic rule of grammar. Now let's see between A and E. Let's see, do we really need this contradiction? So let's see, it is given people agree, may agree, and it is difficult to find support. It's a very strange thing. If people agree, it should be easy to find support, not difficult to find support. So in this case, the two ideas given in the two parts of the sentence are contradictory, and that is why we need a contradiction word. The contradiction word is missing here, so this answer will also be wrong. There are other things also. You can see verbs are preferred to adjectives, adjectives are preferred to nouns. So this is a verb form, this is a noun form. Clearly the GMAT will tilt towards A. Also, one more thing, if you're considering the idiom that, oh, this is awkward and that is why I eliminated, you have made the most fatal mistake anyone can make on GMAT SC, and that is using intuition. If you use intuition, you are doomed. You are just doomed. As I just explained to you that this may be awkward to your ear, but this is the right expression in American and British English, and there is no expression as how much ever. However much is the correct expression. So now let's evaluate this question in terms of prime. Did we use preferences? Yes, verb form versus noun form was preference. Did we use a rule? Yes, that and that parallelism was a rule. Did we use an idiom? Yes, however much is the idiom. And did we use meaning clarity? Obviously, as we just discussed, the two ideas are contradictory and we need a contradiction word that is related to meaning clarity. And obviously, we were eliminating all the time. We were not selecting an answer that any answer is just correct because it sounds correct or seems correct or anything like that. So this is prime in application. So if you apply this prime technique on every single SC question, there is no chance that you can go wrong. You will get 100% accuracy even in sentence correction. Obviously not something that anyone even imagines. All right, let's see the next question. Okay, dear friend, welcome to an 800 level problem in sentence correction. This is genuinely one of those questions that will test you to the hilt. So I hope you're absolutely ready. I need 200% concentration of yours at this stage. Now, as I already said, any question that is above 700 level definitely tests meaning clarity. So let's understand this clearly as to what this question is saying. If I scan the beginning of the underline, I really do not get much difference. So if you scan the end of the underline, let's see, scientists had to remove it. In this case, scientists had to remove it. In this case, they means obviously scientists removed it. They had to remove it. Scientists again. It had to be removed painstakingly. No scientists here. And it had to be painstakingly removed by scientists. So do you realize that 4 of the options give the idea that scientists were removing something, but option D does not commit to the fact that scientists were removing something. Now, this will be a little complicated for you to understand if you do not visualize, so please pay attention. Suppose for some time in history, they were removing it painstakingly from human dead bodies. And later, at some point of time, let's say in the year 1950, randomly I'm taking, they learned. So who learned? We know that scientists learned. So from this point on, this has been the idea of science. But prior to that, first of all, we don't know for how long this continued. Suppose this went on for 10,000 years. The painful way of extracting this hormone from the pituitary gland of human dead bodies. Now, we do not know who was doing this thing. This was done for 10 years or 10,000 years. That also we do not know. But can I surely say that the scientists were doing this work? Absolutely no such thing. We can say scientists learned to do this, learned to synthesize later, but who was extracting it from the human dead bodies earlier? We do not know. Because let's say this process had been going on for 10,000 years. Science itself is a few hundred years old. So for 10,000 years, scientists could not have even existed. So this is impossible that scientists would have been doing this. Maybe scientists were doing it. Maybe this process is just 100 years here. And scientists were themselves doing it. But we do not know who was doing this. So we cannot say scientists were doing. So that is why it had to be painstakingly removed. Now this is the passive voice, and the passive voice is a great answer when we do not want to commit to the subject who did something. If you have to say, whenever I give my car for service, it comes repaired. You don't have to say he repairs it, because I sometimes don't know who was repairing my car. So when you do not know the subject, or when the subject is not important, or when the subject need not be emphasized, it is better to use the passive voice. All right, so answer D looks absolutely fine in terms of meaning clarity. Now let's see some more ways to deal with this problem. Whenever you have a pronoun, always find its reference. And we find that there is this it. What were they removing? They were removing the synthetic growth hormone. So the word it goes to the entire synthetic growth hormone. If I say Captain Cool Dhoni scored a century, he was the only one scoring a century. Now if I say this, will the word he go only to Dhoni, or will this go to Captain Cool Dhoni? Obviously, you can say the word he will go to Dhoni, but Dhoni is also Captain Cool Dhoni, so he will go to Captain Cool Dhoni. If I say 20,000 strong US army was stationed in a particular area, it destroyed many targets. Now the word it cannot just go to US army, it will have to go to 20,000 strong US army. So the whole thing it will go to whatever it is. If I say good people should donate money because they are so few, now the word they will not go just to people but to good people. So the pronoun should go to the entire noun phrase or the adjective plus noun. So in this case, it refers to synthetic growth hormone. Now, if you look at the meaning clarity, if I say, where was it extracted from? From the pituitary glands of human cadavers. That means this is a natural and organic source. From a natural organic source, can we remove something synthetic? Synthetic means artificial. So impossible to remove something synthetic from a natural and organic source. That eliminates three answers in a flash. All of these use the word synthetic. Synthetic. You should also realize, why do they change the word synthetic to synthesize later? That means this is being tested. I'll repeat what I said. There is no chance that from a human dead body, which is a natural and organic source, something that is painstakingly taken out is directly synthetic or directly artificial. Now, what is the meaning of learn to synthesize? Synthesize means to be able to make something chemically in the lab without any natural ingredients. Just by taking chemical ingredients, you can create something. So that is. So they learn to synthesize. That means they learn to make it in the laboratory. Now let's see, if you say before learning, you should always see what is coming after the comma. It says it. Now look at option A. If I say before learning, what is coming after the comma is scientists here. So now what is logical? Who was learning? Scientists were learning or the hormone was learning? Obviously the scientists were learning. So here the word it is wrongly placed. It cannot come. This error is called misplaced modifier. Now if I give you a sentence something like this, looking at the picture a thought came to his mind. While talking we may make all kinds of mistakes and we may actually talk like this, but imagine this, who is looking at the picture? If I said like this, it will mean the thought was looking at the picture, whereas we know he was looking at the picture. So what is the correction here? Looking at the picture, it should not be a thought. He thought of something or he got a thought. So who was looking at the picture? He was looking at the picture. This error is called misplaced modifier, and option E has this error called misplaced modifier. That is one more reason why option E is wrong. Now I hope you realized something, my dear friend. Any question above 700 level will surely test meaning clarity. You cannot get this answer by grammar alone, because you might feel that option A is grammatically correct and option C is grammatically correct. Yes, they are actually grammatically correct, but they have the wrong meaning. And this meaning clarity is something that you'll have to really focus on if you want to solve all the 700 plus or 750 plus level questions easily in sentence correction. We will deal with all this in detail in our course. So as I said, this prime method takes me more than 10 hours to teach. I just could give you a glimpse of this in this session. Okay, let's move on. Okay, dear friend, welcome to the most dreaded section of the GMAT, reading comprehension. I've written out a few things about it. Let me explain one by one. The first thing, it is called the final frontier on your exam, because if your RC performance is bad on the test day, no matter what happens, you can never salvage that test. Even if you do exceptionally well in all the other parts of the GMAT, you will not be able to cross 700. You might probably end up at a 680 or a 660 or a 690, but definitely not 700. Now, there are many reasons why this happens. One, if RC goes wrong, it goes wrong in chunks. And as you must be knowing, the GMAT penalizes consecutive mistakes very heavily. And reading comprehension is one area that can make you go wrong in 4 questions at a time completely. Again, maybe another passage. Once again, if it is not understood, you may go wrong once again in 4 questions at a time. And that day is not your day in that case. So it goes wrong in chunks. There's always a problem of concentration on reading comprehension. There's a psychological thing that, oh, such a huge passage, I don't even know what it's trying to say. I don't know the topics. There is a problem of stamina, focus, everything. Even pacing is a big issue, because when you see the clock ticking in front of you, reading comprehension really becomes even more challenging. And your mind goes blank when nothing is registering on a passage. And this happens very often if you're not very well prepared. So there is a lot in reading comprehension that you'll have to really take care of. I repeat, dear friend, if your RC performance on the test day is bad, no matter what happens, you will not even get 700 score, forget a 760. So let me tell you, my dear friend, every single person struggles with RC. I'm going to share the feedback of 3 different students, each of whom scored a 770 under my guidance. And all these 3 people in the beginning struggled genuinely with reading comprehension. But let's see what they have to say about the technique that you are going to learn, Octave. Now this person, Akshat Mittal, GMAT score 770 and London Business School background. This person, Harsha, Darden, Akanksha, GMAT score 770, Booth. So let's see what these 3 have to say about their initial struggle with reading comprehension and how Octave really helped them. And then we will actually learn Octave.
Hi, my name is Akshat Mittal. I enrolled in Top GMAT. and I scored a 770, quant 50, verbal 45. RC Octave, RC becomes a cakewalk if you've done about 50 passages from Octave.
Ended up with a 770 on the GMAT. Some of the methods or the techniques that he uses, whether it's Octave, I found those to be really effective, and with lots of practice, almost become subconscious.
From the verbal point of view, I had a hard time with RC. Very focused questions, exactly what the author was trying to say, what was, their tone, things like that. I didn't have a very focused way of reading through a passage. And I think the Octave method that was taught to us in class really helped, and I don't think any of the other methods actually work quite as well as Octave does. It's pretty much all you need for RC.
So, okay, let's understand Octave. First of all, this method takes me more than 10 hours to teach fully. Right now, you're going to be seeing just a glimpse of it. So what do we do in a passage? We should look for the opinion of the author, first of all, only the personal opinion of the author. And there are possibilities that author may have no opinion, the author may have a mild opinion, the author may have a strong opinion. But remember, the author will never have wavering opinion or uncertain opinion or ambivalent. Ambivalent means not certain, having two different feelings about something. One more thing, opinions can always be challenged, opinions can be supported, but facts can never be challenged and facts can never be supported. So this is another thing about opinion. We should always focus on contradiction words such as however, but, yet, ironically. The next thing we focus on is the tone of the passage, whether it is positive or negative or neutral. Positive obviously means a tone of optimism or praise, admiration. Negative means a tone of pessimism or criticism. If the author does not have a personal opinion, then the tone is neutral. The tone of the author doesn't change midway through the passage. So if the author is optimistic, the author will remain optimistic throughout about the same thing. Now, there are a few words that can totally mess the tone of a passage if you are not paying attention. For example, the word little, it's actually negative in tone and it means hardly any or no or none. That means if I say he's little better today than he was yesterday, means he is not better at all, hardly any better, or not better at all. If I have to say he's better, then I have to say he's a little better than what he was yesterday. He has little money, that is why he's always worried about his future, negative. He has a little money, so he's not much worried about his future. Same way, few means hardly any, a few means some. He has few friends, that is why he's lonely. On the other hand, he's never lonely because he has a few friends. So this is how. Qualified means limited, not full, with some reservations, with some boundaries. So I give him my qualified support means I do not give him my full support. On the other hand, unqualified means complete, full, total. That means absolutely no boundaries. If you say I give him my unqualified support, means even if he commits a murder, I'll still support him. That is the meaning of unqualified, complete support. The last two words actually sound negative but are neutral in tone. Both of them mean unbiased, scientific, and objective. For example, an umpire or a referee in a match must always remain disinterested in the match. But that doesn't mean the umpire or referee should not be interested in the match. It means the umpire or referee should remain unbiased, not taking sides. Now, last three things, these are useful while solving the questions. The first three are more useful while reading the passage. So while solving the questions, in the option choices, we must avoid superlatives, words such as best or most, worst or least, etc., etc. And we should avoid something that is specific in the passage but is generalized in the answer choices. For example, we have a passage coming up on Javan rhinos. The answer choices should stick to the Javan rhino and not generalize to any animal or other animals or other mammals, etc. So always avoid something that is specific in the passage but has been generalized in the answer choices. And obviously, we always verify and eliminate and never select an answer thinking this sounds correct. So this is the framework. It is obviously not enough, because as I said, it takes me more than 10 hours to teach this entire concept in detail. Right now, I'm just giving you a glimpse of it. Now let's see how to apply Octave in the passages. So as you know, the first letter in Octave is O, which stands for opinion, which means we should be checking the personal opinion of the author. Remember, this is the only thing that matters, whether the author has a personal opinion or not. In opinion, other opinions really don't count here. So when we see dramatic advances, people feel that this is something very positive, but this is just a fact. Again, dominant technology is a fact. This is not the opinion of the author. LCD is a dominant technology. Many advantages, again, this is a fact. Dramatic advances have happened in electronic technology. It's a fact. Now here are considered the best. Some people feel that this is the personal opinion of the author. But try to understand, as a result, LCD TVs are considered the best. By whom? By general public in general. So this is the general opinion or the general public opinion. In Octave notes, we just read that if the author does not have a personal opinion, the tone of the passage will surely be neutral. If you want to go back to the notes to revise them, please go back and check. If the author does not have a personal opinion, then the tone of the passage has to be neutral. Now, if I look at this bit, supportive advocacy is a positive tone, endorsement is a positive tone, support is a positive tone. Definitely these three cannot be my answers. Now it may have so happened that you have chosen one of these three answers only because you thought that the tone was positive, looking at considered the best in all these things. But remember, when the author does not have a personal opinion, the tone cannot be positive or negative. It has to be neutral. Now let's see, if you want to understand them further, advocacy means a very strong suggestion or a very strong recommendation. So do you think that the author is suggesting or recommending that you should buy LCD TVs? Absolutely not. Endorsement is also when one person is suggesting something to the other person as a recommendation. Definitely not correct. The author is not recommending. And qualified support means limited support. I told you the meaning of the word qualified is very different in reading comprehension. So there is no such thing as limited support because there is no opinion. Also, there is no caution that the author is exercising. The author is just saying facts about LCD TVs. So you cannot choose A, B or E as the answers. Now let's see between C and D what we should choose. So there are two answers. One is intellectual exploration. Let's read this word exploration and let's understand when do we explore something. Explore is when we don't know but we want to know. If I say I want to explore different countries, I want to explore different cuisines, I want to explore this gadget, simply means I do not know, but I want to know about them. Now, here in this passage, the author is not an explorer. The author is not saying I don't know about LCD TVs, but I want to know. That would be exploration. So by elimination, option C looks to be the correct answer. But if you chose it by intuition that, oh, disinterested is a negative word, so this can't be the answer, that is intuition. We know that disinterested is a completely neutral word. It means objective, scientific, unbiased, and not taking any sides. So absolutely, this is a scientific kind of passage. The author is not taking any sides because the author does not have any emotion or any opinion in it. Absolutely 100% perfect answer. Although once again, I'm saying this will be very difficult for some people to believe that this could be the answer. That is why follow Octave very, very precisely. You will never go wrong. Let's see. Now in this passage, let's see the opinion points first of all. Now human efforts to save them may well prove futile. May is a prediction. So this is definitely an opinion and the tone is negative or pessimistic. I have also told you that the author does not change the stand midway through the passage. So if the author is pessimistic, in the next few lines, the author will definitely not turn optimistic. That is a hint. Now let's see, the word thus once again signals a conclusion or an opinion. So even this line is an opinion. Human benevolence may prove, that is once again an opinion or a prediction, little better. Now, if you take this to mean somewhat better, you have made a fatal mistake once again. Little means hardly any or no or none. So no better or not better or hardly any better, which simply means that this portion is again negative or pessimistic in tone. So the author is maintaining the pessimism throughout. Remember, little means hardly any or no or none. It is a negative word. In the last sentence of the passage, the author reiterates his pessimism. Perfect answer. Absolutely. This is perfect. In this case, in the last sentence of the passage, the author expresses slight optimism. This is the mistake that most people will do because they'll think little better means somewhat better, which is not the case. Little means hardly any or not better or no better at all. So absolutely 180-degree answer. Now this thing, genetic diversity is the most important and a species. We also talked about you should avoid superlatives and you should also avoid when the passage is talking about something specific but the options are generalizing it. So let's see, most is a superlative. Is it really the most important factor, genetic diversity? We really do not know. Yes, it is given, it is very important, but maybe food is more important, maybe water is more important, maybe air is more important, maybe something else is more important. So we cannot say it is the most important. Another thing, by Octave, the moment you see a superlative, it is out. Another thing, a species means any species. It does not mean the Javan rhino species. This means any animal. So now this is a case of specific in the passage, which is Javan rhino, and generalized in the option choices, any animal. You should never generalize, and that is why this also will be wrong. So we choose option A here finally. I can understand that both these RC questions may have been very shocking for you, but dear friend, that is the whole thing. Beyond 700 level, such questions are very, very commonly asked, and that is why you should prepare with this kind of approach. You should always have some technique to mathematize the verbal section, otherwise, you'll continue to struggle with it. So, in this session, we covered problem solving, we covered data sufficiency, we covered critical reasoning, we covered sentence correction, and we covered reading comprehension. All the 5 areas on the GMAT that contributes to your score out of 800. Now, for a few minutes, I'd like to give you the details of this course, how this entire video online module works. Alright, so the first thing, this is a self-paced learning course, and I've been offering this since 2012, and students from 75 plus countries have studied from this course so far. It has been regularly updated every single year. So what you get is the most updated and the latest version of it. Another thing, I am the only person who teaches in this entire course all the 4 areas: verbal, quantitative, AWA, and integrated reasoning. And of the exceptionally large number of 99th percentile scores that my students get, more than 75% of them have been the students of our video course since 2012. So let's see some of those success stories. Now, I was very thrilled to see this success story. Two brothers, twin brothers from the US joined this course. They wrote the exam on the same day and they got a 760 score on the same day. Both these brothers are American citizens and both of them were students at Caltech, California Institute of Technology. Now, as I said, I have been offering this course since 2012, and you'll be really surprised to know that the first student of this course was not an Indian student, but a student from Romania called Christian. He took this course and got a score of 760 in his very first attempt using this course. Later, he applied to Stanford and had an admit from there. He was so happy with this course that even when he reached Stanford, wearing the Stanford GSB tag, he sent a video from that campus.
Hi, I'm Christian from Romania and I was a student of Sandeep's video course. I followed the plan in the course and as a result I scored a 760 on the GMAT, the 99th percentile. I can tell you that the course content is great. But what really surprised me is that once I received the course, I didn't actually have to refer to any other book or course. What's more is that I didn't need to reach to Sandeep or anyone else to clarify any doubts that I had because the course was actually self-sufficient.
Okay, so as you just heard Christian say that he did not have to refer to any other book or any other course or any other material, I can reiterate the fact the material provided to you will be so exhaustive that you will not even be able to finish half of it. And despite that, you will get a 99th percentile score if you do whatever you do very sincerely. And please do not study all the extra content available in the GMAT universe. It is not helpful for a 760 plus kind of score. It is just not helpful. Most of the material that is available in the GMAT universe, and there's a lot freely available, is absolute junk when it comes to this requirement. In fact, even the official guide for the GMAT that most institutes and most trainers think is the holy grail, the Bible for the GMAT, is absolutely useless if your target score is 760 and above. Every single question in OG is below 600 level. So what is the point of studying content that is not going to match the exam at the 760 plus level? So studying the OG or any other content in the easy band actually will lull you into a sense of security. Oh wow, the exam is going to be this simple, and when you walk into the test center you get a shock of your life. The exam is so different. Christian also said that he did not have to reach out to me or anybody else for any doubts because the course was absolutely self-sufficient. But that does not mean I do not offer doubt clearing. I offer full-fledged doubt clearing support here. You will have access to me through my number and through my email ID. So no challenge will be faced by you on that count, the doubt clearing part. Now let's hear Christian from the Stanford campus.
Hey Sandeep, I've just attended the Stanford Graduate School of Business Admit Weekend. The place is fantastic. Getting into my dream school is giving me such an amazing feeling. So thanks for offering me the tool to prepare for this exam, and I can tell you the feeling is awesome. I wish this to every one of your students.
Now, another student of the video course who studied only for 2 months and who got a score of 770, Sushmita Krishnamurthy, she got into all the M7 schools. So what are M7 schools? Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, Booth, Kellogg, Columbia, and MIT Sloan. She got into all the 7 schools after this course. So let's see what she has to say about this course.
Hi, I'm Sushmita. I'm an undergraduate at Cornell University. I recently took the GMAT and scored a 770. I didn't use any additional material apart from the video course. And in fact, there was so much practice material within the video course that I wasn't even able to complete it. Still, I was able to score a 770 in 2 months of preparation because Sandeep's course was just fabulous.
Again, as you heard her say, she did not have to refer to any other material whatsoever. And she says that there was so much material even within the video course that she could not finish. Despite that, she got a 770 in just 2 months. Another student, Palash Soni, got a score of 760, got into both Harvard and Wharton, and joined Harvard. Another student, Pooja, who got into Wharton with a scholarship. As you must already be aware that Wharton is the world's #1 global business school right now and not really famous for giving many scholarships, and then also getting a scholarship from Wharton is an absolutely miraculous achievement. So congratulations, Pooja. And since 2012, we've had more than 7,000 such success stories in the 99th percentile scores and in Ivy League business schools. Another student who went to Harvard after scoring 760 got into both Harvard and Stanford using this course. Now, this one is a very surprising story. This student took a video course. We did not even come to know that she got a score of 760 and she joined Wharton. And then, after when she graduated from Wharton, when her brother had to do this course, she contacted us. So, after almost 4 years, we came to know that a student got 760 and went to Wharton. This person, video course student, 750 score, went to Wharton, and you can see so many more people like this. Now, the highest score obtained by some of my students has been 790. This is Rohit Sood, one of the students who went to Kellogg eventually. There's another student who went to Yale eventually, Rahul Gupta, who got a 760 score. Another student got a 760 score. Now, I feel very proud sharing one of the stories with you. So, I had a student called Ishita Sen who did the same video course, went to London Business School to do her MBA, and then she did her PhD in finance. And after that, she applied to Harvard Business School to become faculty, and right now she's professor of finance at Harvard Business School. So if you ever happen to go to Harvard, one of my students will be teaching you at Harvard. Another person got a 750 score, joined Kellogg School of Management. Radhika got a 760 on her GMAT, got 100% scholarship at New York University Stern School of Business, and also got into Kellogg with 80% scholarship. So as you can see, dear friend, there have been so many success stories, and yours can be a very similar success story too. You can also get a 760 plus score and an admit to the business school of your choice with my guidance. First, I've had a perfect 800 score on the GMAT twice, once in 2008 and another time in 2019. Beyond that, I've scored 770 score twice, and I've scored 780 and 790 in my respective attempts. My minimum score ever on the GMAT has been 770. In addition to this, I have had a perfect 340 score on the GRE. This is my exam date, you can check. Apart from that, I have been accepted by Harvard Business School 3 times, once for its MBA program, once for its doctoral program, and once for its master's programs. This is my latest admission offer. I applied in 2014 and I got through in 2015 for the class of 2017, which means the class would have been 2015 to 17 if I had joined. All right, so this is about me. There is one message I want to give you, dear friend, about the GMAT and why you should really start now. First thing, the sooner you prepare for the GMAT, the better, because it opens so many doors for you. And even if you have to apply a couple of years later, it makes absolute sense to get this out of the way, because the GMAT becomes the biggest stumbling block for people. Also, I feel there are many people who deserve way better, but the GMAT is the biggest stumbling block in their career. They're just not able to ace this. So get this out of the way as soon as you can. The scores are valid for 5 years. So even if you're deciding that I'll do my MBA or MS or PhD 2 years later or 3 years later, get this exam out of the way. With my guidance, a score of 99th percentile and an admission to business school of your choice can become reality for you. Please remember, your current level does not matter, but your current level of ambition matters. We have had people who've got 330 score in one attempt have gone on to score 750. We got people who've gotten 18 in verbal to 40 in verbal. We got people who got 26 in verbal to 42 in verbal. We got people 21 to 42 in verbal. And the most amazing of it all is someone from 21 in verbal to 46 in verbal. All these things have happened for my students. So you can imagine what kind of transformation is possible if the guidance is right, but more than that, if your attitude is right. If you are someone who is very lax and very relaxed and will say, okay, it doesn't matter, whatever my life is, let it go on, then this is not for you. If you are extremely sincere, then only join this course. Your current level doesn't matter, but your current level of ambition matters and your current level of sincerity matters. Your actual level doesn't matter. You may be below average, there is no problem. We can get you to a very high score and a business school of your choice. These are the details where you can find us. You can contact us. This is a number. You can write to us. This is a website. Thank you for your time. This is Sandeep Gupta, founder of Top 1% GMAT, signing off. Thank you.